What really is truth? There's something actually, you can get a PhD in this, it's taught in schools, it's very academic, but it's a way to actually study. It's called epistemology, the study of how people come to what they believe is true. How do they do that? There's two main areas we talk about in this class all the time. The first one is called the correspondence test for truth. The second one is called the coherence test. So this is about testing something. When you hear someone say something, how do you know it's true? The second one is called deciding. It's this idea of relative versus subjective, which is based on opinion, people's opinions of what's true. The other one is called this idea of a justified belief, absolute versus this idea of objective. Now that one's talking about something a little different. That one's talking about circumstances you're in, right? And we're going to get into that. So one is opinion, one is circumstances. Being able to tell the difference in how you decide truth. Okay, how people test for truth. Okay, correspondence versus a coherence test. The correspondence test is real simple. I just heard something, somebody just made a claim. Is what they're saying corresponding to reality? Does it match the facts of what I know to be true? Okay? For example, does that make any sense? Why not? Why not? Law of non-contradiction. He's acting like he's a PhD in philosophy. That's okay.
Bachelor is a man who is not married.
Because I know the definition of a bachelor. I feel like I understand what a bachelor is, right? So to me, that can't correspond to truth. So far, so good? So I look at that one and I go, nah, that makes no sense. How about this one? What are you laughing about? This is one of the new emojis used at Apple Computer, and it's being used more and more around the country in businesses and corporations. All right? How do you know that's not true? She's saying men can't get pregnant. All right? Now, do you think that's self-explanatory? Are you aware there's a major attack right now on this whole idea of identity for who you are sexually and in gender? What is the church doing about it? Nothing. All right? Guys, this is what's happening in our culture. We used to talk about atheism, and we used to talk about challenges that people have where people don't believe in God. We're so far past that now because nobody's standing up for truth. And so now you have people pushing what is true for them. And the church is inside laughing at these things while this is happening in our culture. All right, so that's the test you need to understand for truth. The second one is called the coherence test. This one's kind of interesting because this one is about evidence. This is about, well, you know what? People can have different points of view, but what does the evidence say that I point to? So a couple examples of these would be any courtroom you go into when they sequester you to be a juror. You didn't see it happen. You're going to make a decision based on the evidence that's presented, right? The other one would be something like the origin of the universe. Nobody was there. How do you know? Right? What's the evidence for it? The coherence test to back up the fact that the universe really came from nothing. Okay, so that's testing. It's real simple. If you can get in your head the difference between correspondence and coherence, you can right away have that radar go up, beep, 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 when people say things, say, excuse me, that's not factual, right? Or say, what's your evidence? I just had somebody who's in this class talk to me about their community group where now the Longview professors are getting a little more aggressive, telling the students, you're biased by thinking the Bible's true. And they asked me, well, what do we say to that? I'm like, serious? You've been in my class over a year. There's nothing biased about evidence. If you have evidence where you're making clear decisions based on, and that evidence conforms to one of these tests so that you know it's true, then they're biased. Because you need to ask them, what's your evidence for the fact that you think the Bible's not true? What is it? They're not going to have any, right? The whole point of this class is to help us to break down and deconstruct those kind of questions so you can get to the gospel. Because in today's culture, saying Bible verses isn't going to convince anyone anymore. You have to deal with their questions. So far, so good? So, deciding what's true. This is an interesting one. Absolute truth literally means it's true regardless of circumstances. If you've been in my class when we did book 1, you'll know this. We're going to be doing it again. Relative truth means it's true depending on my circumstances. So in other words, circumstances or the situation I am in can determine what's true or not. So let me ask you a question. Can you think of any circumstance where it would be true that killing someone is okay? War? They're trying to kill you? Someone breaks in my house at 2 in the morning? They've got a gun? I don't think negotiation will work. Harsh language, right? If I defend myself, the law says if I kill them by defending myself when they break in my house, that's okay. I don't go to jail for that. Interesting. Okay, objective truth is different though. Objective truth means it's true regardless of my opinion, not circumstance. So you've got this idea of absolute versus relative that has to do with circumstances. Then you have this idea of what we call objective truth versus subjective. You just watched a video on subjective truth at Florida Gulf Coast University, where whether you're a male or female all depends on your feelings, your opinion. Okay? Can you think of an example where objective, and if you know the answer, don't give it, where objective truth and relative truth collide with each other? Where there's a real objective truth out there, but you live by a relative truth that we all live by, where there's a collision. And I'll give it to you. All right, this happens every day. Every day. You're driving on the road, the speed limit sign says 55. How fast do you go? 60. Is there an objective truth? What's the objective truth? 55. Why do you break the objective truth and go faster? Why? What's that, Earl? Everybody else is doing it. You know what's happening in our culture? Abortion's okay because, you know, everybody else is deciding what's right for me or not, right? It's okay to call myself a woman if I'm a man because, you know what? That's where the culture's going, right? So think about this. This is a perfect example for us. What people really do is when it's 55 and you're driving, just like Earl said, you look around and see what other cars are doing. When they pass you going 65, you speed up a little, right? Now, he has every right to pull you over going 55. If you're going 60 and he pulls you over and you're going 55, what's your first thought? It's not fair. I'm only going 5 miles over. That's what most of us think. I'll never get caught. They won't pull me over. This is a cultural way we live, where you can see the conflict between objective and subjective. Apply that now to our culture on these other issues. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, structures. I could never go to my boss if I'm building a bridge and say, you can use any type of steel you want because it all depends on your feelings. You know how I'm going to design this bridge? I just feel like it would be better to use this. Could I get away with that? No. Science, or you're in the operating room. Well, you know what? I think I can do the liver transplant. You know why? I just feel like I've watched enough videos. So I feel good about it, you know? It's interesting, isn't it? With science, law, accounting, finances, we don't live by feelings. There are hard, fast rules of how to operate that are very objective. Where we see this subjective is in ethics and religion. That's where we see it happening in our culture. And yet there's a standard called the Bible that's just like the handbook for how you build a bridge. It's clear. And yet we look at it and we believe we know better. You see what I'm saying? And the ones who really support the Bible, the keepers of it, is the church of Christ. And we're not saying anything. We're not saying that's wrong, it violates the rule in the Bible in Genesis. Some of us do, most of us feel very uncomfortable, but that's the truth. Okay, so now we've talked about testing. We've talked about how people decide. This is really important because I want you to be able in your head to be able to use this when you're talking to people. This is how you begin that conversation. Now we're talking about how somebody's going to try to persuade you what's true. Aristotle wrote a very interesting thesis on rhetoric. Rhetoric is an art form that's used to persuade an audience. You see lawyers using it all the time, right? So besides black and white facts, there's a way you can present something that can convince people, right? So how you think can be shaped by more than just the evidence. We do it in church all the time. We have, lively music going on. Sometimes smoke's coming out of the ground. We've got people dancing up there and all kinds of things going on. And what is our worship team trying to do when we come in the morning? What are they trying to do when the audience is coming into the auditorium to worship? They want to fire you up. They never play dull, quiet music. They don't play dentist music, right? You come in there, they're trying to get you fired up, right? Getting you fired up has nothing to do with what the Bible says. It has to do with getting you in the right frame of mind. So there's a way to try to persuade people even in church services, and it happens everywhere. Jesus did it all the time. When he's speaking the Sermon on the Mount, and he's talking about blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek. When he's doing those things, he's talking about this idea of a future hope that you have beyond this world, because that's the Lord blesses you in that situation. He's using one of these ways to try to persuade you that he's right. There's nothing wrong with using it, you just have to be aware of it. So let's take a look at it. There's 3 techniques that are used all the time. The first one is called logos. It has to do with evidence-based. We just talked about correspondence versus coherence. I'm going to show you the facts, what the facts are, so that can help persuade you for what's true. The second one is called ethos. This is very interesting. This is back in the 1950s, 1960s, where they actually used doctors to smoke cigarettes in their campaign for saying that cigarette smoking doesn't cause cancer. So they're appealing to an expert to try to convince you that they're right. So that happens a lot. Or the charisma of the speaker. How well you enjoy listening to them. They may be someone who pulls you in, but they're not telling the truth. And then the last one, what does that look like to you? What are they trying to do? They're pulling on your heart, right? They're going to give you something pulling on your heart. When early on, when they were showing illegal alien immigrants coming in, and they showed them in cages. I don't know if you remember those days, 3 or 4 years ago. What were they doing when they showed them to you in cages? What were they trying to do? Get you angry, get you fired up, right? Didn't matter if it was true or not. So all 3 of these techniques are being used on you all the time when you watch TV, commercials, people in speaking events, podcasts, YouTubes. You need to be aware of these 3 things. How do you test what they're saying is true? Are they being subjective or objective? Is it just their opinion? And what type of rhetoric are they giving me? Is it logic and facts? Is it just an expert telling me what he thinks, he or she thinks, or is it pulling on my emotions? If you can be aware of these things, this is really going to help you understand what's going on. Because this is how we're being attacked. So far, so good? Okay. How do you form your truth? All this is happening. How do you actually then embrace something that's true for you? Okay, so a worldview is a German word. It has to do with the window through which you view the world. How you view it, and for you personally to determine true versus false, right versus wrong, what's real, what isn't real. You go from a worldview to forming a belief to setting personal values to behaving, right? There's an attack on our culture. And what I mean by culture, this is the collective manifestation of your intellect. So it's the media, it's entertainment industry, the arts and sciences, all of it, it's all coming together. We've lost the education system. We certainly have lost the media, right? The entertainment industry, pretty much lost. We're being bombarded on all sides to try to influence our worldview. Okay? So the problem is we often don't see our worldview. Rather, you see everything through it. A lot of times you'll see people arguing a point of view, but they don't even realize what it is they believe. They just know they've been persuaded emotionally, whatever it is. But when you ask someone, like when I ask somebody, why are you a Christian? I never hear because it's true. Right? If we don't know it's true, I don't want to come to church if it's false. Why get up Sunday morning, come in here, if it's not true? So it's important to know. So this is, let's take a look at a little video here for a minute. Proverbs is really good about this. Proverbs is all about how you think is who you are, not what you do. If what we do was who we are, we'd all be going to hell. Because we all do things that offend God. What we do is an outpouring, an effect of what we think. Just like Jesus said, what's in your heart really is defining the things you do and who you are. So it comes down to internally, how do you process and decide what's true for you? So being able to counter the truth claims of the world with biblical truth and what God says is the key, and standing for God and what he says. This is what's needed in our culture, and that only happens in the gospel. It can't happen anywhere else. Without the gospel and without Jesus Christ as the Lord of your life, you don't stand a chance in being able to actually know what's true. What I just said sounds crazy outside of church. You guys with me so far? Okay. So, why do you believe your own worldview, the way you see things? There's some keys here. Is it something my parents taught me? Is it my friends? Is it things I've experienced? Do I base my worldview on my experiences? Or is it my feelings? Most people do that. That's where they get their worldview from, not from the Bible. So what you have to do is you have to think about this and say to yourself, how does a personal belief, my personal belief, become a truth? How does that happen? Well, are you aware of it? Is the things you believe you're consciously aware? You don't have to be reminded in church. It's something you live your life by. Secondly, does it satisfy anything you question or doubt? Does your belief satisfy that? If it doesn't, you have a worldview that needs work. Third, are you motivated to behave and act a certain way because of that worldview? And lastly, are you convicted to live that way? Forming a worldview doesn't translate into living it without conviction, without making conscious decisions on a daily basis, This is the crucifixion thing that Paul talks about, crucified with Christ. It's a daily choice that we look at our worldview and what we've embraced and decide that's how I'm going to live. It's hard because you're going to be confronted more and more by people who don't agree with you. You follow me so far? Okay. So it's all about, do I take what I believe seriously? Right? It's not, do I take myself seriously? This is one of the problems with our church. Not with our church, with churches in general. One of the worst things you can do is take yourself seriously. I mean, we're all chuckleheads, right? We screw up all the time. I mean, it's like nonstop, right? I mean, you think you're doing something right. Your wife or your husband points it out and goes, really? Right? And you know. So taking yourself seriously is ridiculous. But taking Jesus Christ seriously and what you believe, that's a whole nother thing, right? So the beauty of looking at someone and saying, do you really think I'm any different than you? I'm the same as you. The only difference I have is I'm forgiven. I recognize these things, and there's one source only to forgive what I know is a major issue or problem in my life. You just are someone who doesn't agree with me on that source of forgiveness. So churches standing up and being aggressive and confronting people and saying you're going to hell and all these things, that might be true, but that's taking yourself way too seriously. Going back to the four elements of this ministry, it's in love telling the truth. Hey, I love you to death, but you know what? I'm sorry, you're wrong. I know what a man is. I'm really confident I do. I know the difference. I know these things. A baby in the womb is a real person. Does this make sense?